Dad, I didn't think you'd take it this personally. Those were the words my daughter said after I found out I wasn't invited to her wedding. Not from her. Not from a phone call. Not even from a wedding announcement. I found out because a former coworker sent me a Facebook screenshot while I was sitting alone in my kitchen eating reheated meatloaf. The picture showed my daughter in a white dress, a veil, a bouquet, a smile I'd spent my entire life protecting. And standing beside her was a man I'd met exactly 4 times. At the bottom of the picture were the words, "Best day of our lives." I remember staring at the screen, then at the calendar hanging on my refrigerator. The wedding wasn't next month. It wasn't next week. It was Saturday, 3 days away, and I wasn't invited. At 70 years old, I'd survived a lot worse than heartbreak. I'd buried my wife, worked through injuries, spent winters climbing frozen utility poles, watched friends die younger than they should have. But nothing prepares a parent for discovering they're no longer considered family. My name is Frank Dawson. I live in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. For 34 years, I worked as a union electrician. The kind of job that leaves your knees aching before you hit 50. The kind of job where your hands never fully straighten again. The kind of job that quietly takes pieces of you while you convince yourself it's worth it because you're building a future for someone else. For me, that someone else was my daughter Emily. When Emily was 12, her mother died from breast cancer. One day we were planning a family vacation. 6 months later, I was standing beside a grave wondering how I was supposed to raise a little girl alone. I wasn't perfect. Far from it. I burned dinners, forgot school forms, showed up late to ballet recitals because I was working overtime. But I tried. Lord knows I tried. I packed lunches before dawn, helped with homework after 10-hour shifts, sat through school concerts and soccer games even when I could barely keep my eyes open. Every decision I made revolved around one question. What does Emily need? I never asked what Frank needed. That seemed selfish back then. Years passed. Emily grew up, went to college, got her degree, found a marketing job in Columbus, moved into an apartment downtown. I was proud of her, prouder than I've ever been of anything. Even after she moved out, I continued helping whenever she needed it. A car repair, a medical bill, an unexpected expense. Nothing outrageous. Just the kind of help parents give when they can. About 6 years earlier, she'd called me in tears. Her rent had gone up. She was struggling financially. I told her I'd help temporarily until she got back on her feet. Temporary. That's the important word. At least it was supposed to be. Months turned into years. The transfers continued. Sometimes $300, sometimes $500. I never complained. She always said things would improve soon. And I believed her. Parents are funny that way. We believe things because we want to, not because they're true. A few hours after seeing the Facebook post, I called Emily. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Dad." She sounded nervous immediately. That told me everything. "Emily," I said quietly. "I saw the wedding pictures." Silence. Then a long sigh. "Oh," just one word. "Oh." Not surprise, not concern, just acceptance that the secret was out. "When were you planning on telling me, Dad?" "Was there an invitation lost in the mail?" Another silence. "No." I leaned back in my chair. The old wood creaked beneath me. "No. It was Brandon's idea to keep things small." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes pain comes out sounding like laughter. "Small." "Dad, I counted 93 people in the pictures." She didn't answer. I continued. "Your cousin Linda was there." Silence. "Your old high school volleyball coach was there." More silence. 3 people from Brandon's office were there. Nothing. Finally, she spoke. "We wanted people who were actively involved in our lives." The words landed harder than she probably intended. Actively involved. I thought about every overtime shift, every late-night emergency, every birthday gift, every rent payment, every sacrifice. Actively involved. I swallowed hard. "I see. Don't make this into something bigger than it is." That sentence hurt more than everything else. Because to her, apparently, this wasn't a big thing. To me, it was everything. After we hung up, I sat alone for nearly an hour. The house felt different. Older somehow. Emptier. People talk about the pains of aging. The bad knees. The backaches. The medications lined up beside the coffee maker. But nobody warns you about becoming invisible. Nobody warns you that one day the people you built your life around may decide you're no longer necessary. A few hours later, my phone rang again. It was my old friend Carl, retired firefighter, 72 years old, Vidover. One of the few people who tells me the truth whether I want to hear it or not. "You okay?" he asked. "No." "Good." I laughed. "What kind of answer is that?" "The honest kind." I told him everything. When I finished, he stayed quiet. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Frank, stop auditioning for a role you've already earned." "What?" "You're her father, not an applicant." The words hit me hard. Because he was right. For years, I'd been trying to earn appreciation that should have existed naturally. Trying harder, giving more, helping more, paying more, hoping eventually it would be enough. It never was. That night, instead of sitting home feeling sorry for myself, I opened my laptop. I searched flights, then hotels, then vacation packages. The next morning, I booked a trip to Hawaii. If my daughter didn't want me at her wedding, I wasn't going to spend that day staring at my living room wall. 3 days later, while she walked down the aisle, I stood barefoot on a beach in Maui. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. Waves rolled gently against the shore. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. Nobody wanted money. Nobody needed advice. Nobody expected a rescue. Just ocean, wind, silence. I sat there watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon. And for the first time in a very long time, I asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. What would happen if I stopped saving everyone? What would happen if I finally chose myself? The answer was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The funny thing about getting older is that peace starts looking different. When I was young, peace meant having enough money in the bank. When I was middle-aged, it meant knowing my daughter was safe. By the time I turned 70, peace meant waking up without somebody needing something from me. And for one glorious week in Hawaii, that's exactly what I had. I stayed in a modest beachfront hotel in Maui. Nothing fancy. The kind of place retirees choose because they'd rather spend money on experiences than luxury. Every morning I woke before sunrise. Old habits die hard. For 40 years I'd been getting up before dawn for work. Even retirement couldn't change that. I'd pour myself a cup of coffee and walk along the shoreline while the sky slowly brightened. Most of the people I met were around my age. Retired teachers, veterans, former truck drivers, grandparents, people carrying decades of stories in their faces. One morning, I struck up a conversation with a retired Marine named Walter. He had to be close to 80. The man walked with a cane but still carried himself like he was inspecting troops. We sat on a bench overlooking the water. Eventually, he asked why I was traveling alone. I told him, "Not all the details, just enough." "My daughter got married this week," I said. "Congratulations." I wasn't invited. Walter stared at the ocean for several seconds. Then he nodded. "That'll leave a mark." It was such an old-fashioned phrase that it made me smile. "Yeah," I admitted. "It does." He tapped his cane against the pavement. "You know what I learned after Vietnam? What? People eventually reveal how much they value you." I looked at him. He continued, "The mistake most of us make is refusing to believe them." Those words stayed with me. The rest of the trip felt different. Not sad, reflective. I spent a lot of time looking back over my life. The strange thing was that I wasn't angry at Emily. Not yet. Mostly I was disappointed. Disappointed that somewhere along the way, our relationship had become transactional. I gave. She received. The cycle repeated, year after year, and somehow neither of us questioned it. One afternoon, I sat watching humpback whales in the distance. A younger couple nearby was arguing. The husband wanted to spend money on an excursion. The wife was worried about the cost. Normal life stuff. Nothing dramatic. As I listened, I realized something. Those two were making decisions together. Accepting consequences together. Building a life together. Meanwhile, my daughter and her husband seemed to be building their future on the assumption that I would always cover whatever gap appeared. That thought bothered me more than the wedding. Because weddings are emotional. Financial dependence is a choice. A week later, I boarded a flight back to Ohio. The moment I landed and turned off airplane mode, my phone practically exploded. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages. More notifications than I'd received in months. At first, I thought there had been an emergency. My stomach tightened. I checked the names. Every single one was from Emily, or her husband Brandon. 17 missed calls, 6 voicemails, more than 20 text messages. I opened the first one. "Dad, call me." The next one came 15 minutes later. "Please call me ASAP." Another. "It's important." Then things became increasingly frantic. "The rent is overdue." "Did you transfer the money?" "Dad, we need an answer." A message from Brandon followed. "Frank, we really need to talk." I almost laughed. Frank, not Dad, not family. Frank, interesting. I sat in the airport terminal reading through everything. The messages stretched across several days. The desperation became more obvious with each one. Finally, I called home and drove back to my house. I didn't return any calls. Not immediately. I wanted time to think. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. something I'd started doing after retirement. Writing things down helps organize old thoughts. I flipped through 6 years of bank records, transfer after transfer, month after month, year after year. The total surprised even me. By the time I finished adding everything together, I'd contributed enough money to buy a decent used car. Maybe two. And that's when the truth finally hit me. The arrangement had never been temporary. Not for them. Temporary arrangements eventually end. This one had become part of their budget, part of their expectations, part of their lifestyle. They weren't surprised when money arrived. They expected it. The next morning, Emily called again. This time I answered. Finally, she said. No hello, no asking about Hawaii, no mention of the wedding, just relief that the ATM had picked up the phone. Good morning, Emily. Dad, the rent payment didn't go through. I remained quiet. We got a notice from the landlord. Still quiet? Dad, I heard you. Then why didn't you transfer it? The question hung in the air. Not could you. Not would you. Why didn't you? As though I had failed an obligation. I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd packed thousands of school lunches. The same kitchen where I'd helped her with algebra homework. The same kitchen where I'd cried after her mother's funeral. And suddenly I saw everything clearly. I wasn't being asked for help. I was being billed. Emily, when exactly did this become my responsibility? Silence, then irritation. What are you talking about? I'm asking a simple question. You've always helped. There it was. Not gratitude, expectation. A subtle difference, but a critical one. You remember when this arrangement started? Of course. It was supposed to be temporary. She sighed dramatically. Dad, this isn't the time. No, actually, I think it is. I could hear Brandon speaking in the background. Muffled. Impatient. Emily lowered her voice. Can we discuss this later and handle the rent first? That sentence told me everything. The money mattered. The relationship could wait. For 70 years, I'd tried to be a good man. A dependable man. The kind of father who showed up. The kind who sacrificed. But there comes a point in every person's life when they realize helping someone isn't helping anymore. It's enabling. I opened my messages, typed slowly, read it twice, then sent it. Just one sentence. The same sentence that would change everything. Didn't I tell you that help is a gift, not a lifetime contract? The response arrived less than 30 seconds later. Dad, are you serious? Then another. You're doing this because of the wedding? Then another. This is unbelievable. I set the phone face down. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix the problem. I didn't make excuses. I didn't transfer money. I didn't rescue anyone. And somewhere deep inside, a lifetime of carrying everyone else's burdens became just a little lighter. I had no idea how angry Emily and Brandon were about to become. But for the first time, that wasn't my problem. The first few days after I stopped sending money were surprisingly quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The angry texts slowed down. The phone stopped ringing every hour. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next financial emergency to arrive. I wish I could tell you I felt guilty. Part of me expected to. After all, parents are conditioned to worry, even when our children are grown, even when they've hurt us, even when common sense tells us they're responsible for their own choices. But guilt never came. What came instead was clarity, the kind that arrives late in life when you've finally lived long enough to recognize patterns. A week after our phone call, Emily showed up at my house. I saw her car pull into the driveway just after lunch. She climbed out looking stressed, tired, older somehow, not physically, emotionally. I knew the feeling. Life can age a person quickly when reality starts collecting debts. I opened the front door before she knocked. Hi, Dad. Hi, Emily. Neither of us moved. The distance between us felt much larger than the few feet of concrete separating the porch from the driveway. Finally, she stepped inside. The house still smelled faintly of coffee. A baseball game played quietly on television. Normal things. Comforting things. For a moment, she looked around as if remembering where she came from. The home she'd grown up in. The home I'd fought to keep after her mother died. The home I'd nearly lost twice during recessions. The home that represented thousands of sacrifices she'd never fully seen. She sat down. I took the chair across from her. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she broke the silence. Brandon's upset. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because I noticed she hadn't started with her own feelings. She started with Brandon's. Interesting. I'm sure he is. He thinks you're punishing us. I nodded. Does he? Are you? I leaned back. No. She frowned. Then why stop helping now? There it was again. Not gratitude. Not appreciation. The assumption that help should continue forever. I took a slow breath. Emily, have you ever wondered how many years I've been paying part of your rent? She hesitated. I don't know. 6. Her eyes widened slightly. I continued. 6 years. Neither of us spoke. Do you know how much that adds up to? No, I didn't either. That part was true. Until Hawaii, I'd never added it all together. Never wanted to. Because numbers tell stories people sometimes prefer not to hear. It was supposed to be temporary. She stared at the floor. Things got complicated. Things always get complicated. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. That evening, she left without another argument. I could tell she was frustrated, confused, maybe even hurt. But something else was happening too. For the first time, she was thinking, really thinking. Meanwhile, Brandon apparently wasn't interested in reflection. 2 days later, he called me directly. I almost didn't answer. Curiosity won. Frank, there was that name again. Not Dad, not family, just Frank. Brandon, we need to talk. His tone immediately rubbed me the wrong way. Not because it was hostile, because it was entitled, like a manager calling an employee into a meeting. Okay, Emily's upset. I remained silent. The rent situation is causing serious problems. Again, silence. Finally, he snapped. Are you listening? Yes, then say something. I looked out the kitchen window. A pair of robins hopped across the backyard. Simple creatures, worrying about worms, not mortgages. Not pride, not grown adults expecting their father-in-law to subsidize their lives. What would you like me to say? You could start by helping. There it was. Not apology, not understanding, not accountability. Helping, always helping, never appreciation. I ended the conversation a few minutes later. Nothing productive was accomplished. But something important became clear. Brandon genuinely believed I owed them. That realization changed everything. A month passed, then another, and little pieces of information began finding their way to me. Small-town Ohio isn't as large as people think. News travels, especially among older people. A former coworker ran into Brandon at a gas station. Another acquaintance saw him arguing with a bank representative. Someone else mentioned his truck was suddenly for sale. At first, I ignored the rumors. Then Emily called. This time her voice sounded different. Less defensive, more defeated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you know Brandon had credit card debt? I paused. No. Neither did she. Over the next hour, the truth slowly emerged. The expensive wedding, partly financed. The honeymoon, financed. Furniture, financed. Several vacations, financed. Even parts of their everyday lifestyle were supported by debt. As I listened, pieces finally clicked into place. The rent money wasn't helping them survive. It had been helping them maintain an image, an illusion. And like most illusions, it eventually collapsed. I felt sorry for Emily. I truly did. Not because of the money. Because discovering you've married someone you don't fully know is a painful thing, especially after you've already committed your future. That night I sat alone on my back porch. Summer was beginning to fade. The evening air carried a slight chill, and for some reason I found myself thinking about aging, about men, about the strange burden many of us carry. When you're young, people notice your strength. When you're old, they notice your limitations. The years in between become invisible. The overtime, the missed holidays, the surgeries, the stress, the sacrifices. Nobody sees the weight unless they've carried it themselves. I looked down at my hands, scarred knuckles, arthritis, permanent reminders of decades spent building things, providing, protecting. For years, I'd assumed my value came from what I could give. Money, advice, solutions. But Hawaii had taught me something important. Aging isn't just about losing strength. It's about learning where your responsibility ends. A few weeks later, I joined a local retirement travel group, something I never would have done before. I started taking day trips, meeting new people. Actually enjoying retirement? Imagine that, at 70. Meanwhile, Brandon's world continued shrinking. His truck sold. Then rumors surfaced about missed payments elsewhere. Friends who loved being around him during good times suddenly disappeared. Funny how that works. Success attracts crowds. Struggle reveals who stays. One afternoon, Emily called again. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. Dad, yeah. There was a long pause. Then she asked a question I'd been waiting months to hear. Not about money, not about rent, not about help, just one simple question. Can we talk? And for the first time since the wedding, I heard something I hadn't heard in a very long time. My daughter, not the person demanding support, not the woman defending her husband, just my daughter. Lost, confused, beginning to understand. The conversation that followed would change both of our lives. But neither of us knew that yet. When Emily asked if we could talk, I knew something had changed. Not completely. Not magically. Life doesn't work that way. People don't wake up one morning transformed into better versions of themselves. Real change happens slowly, painfully. Usually after reality teaches lessons, pride refuses to learn. We agreed to meet the following Saturday. She offered to take me to lunch. I suggested she come to my house instead. I wanted her to see something. Something she'd never really seen before. That morning I woke up early, made coffee, straightened up the living room. Then I went into the hallway closet and pulled out several old boxes. Boxes I hadn't opened in years. By the time Emily arrived, photographs and albums covered the dining room table. She walked inside carrying a nervous smile. "Hi, Dad." "Morning." She looked around. "What's all this?" "Sit down." She slowly took a chair. Then she noticed the photographs. Hundreds of them. Some old. Some faded. Some barely holding together. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I picked up the first picture. Emily at age 6, missing 2 front teeth, holding a fishing pole twice her size. "You remember this?" She smiled softly. "Lake Erie." "That's right." I handed her another. Her 8th grade graduation. Then another. Her first car. Then another. College orientation. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. Not because the memories were bad, because she was beginning to notice something. Someone, me, standing beside her in almost every photograph. Not front and center. Not seeking attention. Just there. Always there. She swallowed. "You kept all of these?" "Of course." I reached into one of the boxes, pulled out a stack of old papers. Receipts, bills, documents, things most people throw away. She looked confused. "What's that part of your story?" I handed her a receipt from 20 years earlier. Dance lessons. Then another. Hospital expenses. Then college tuition records. Textbook purchases. Apartment deposits. Car repairs. One after another. Not to shame her. Not to prove a point. Just to show her the truth. A truth children often never see. Parents spend decades carrying burdens quietly. The goal is never recognition. The goal is simply love. But sometimes love becomes invisible. And invisible sacrifices are easily forgotten. Emily stared at the paperwork, her eyes growing wetter with each page. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't know." I nodded. "I know. Because how could she?" Children rarely see the late-night worries, the second jobs, the skipped vacations, the retirement contributions that never happen, the repairs delayed, the dreams postponed. Parents hide those things intentionally. We want our children to feel secure. Unfortunately, security often disguises sacrifice. For nearly an hour, we sat together looking through pieces of our shared life. No arguing, no accusations, just truth. Eventually, Emily broke down. The tears came suddenly, heavy, uncontrolled. "I'm sorry." I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was angry, because I knew she wasn't finished. "I've been thinking about everything." She wiped her eyes. "The wedding." Her voice cracked. "The money." Another pause. "The way I've treated you." I remained quiet. Sometimes silence gives people room to be honest, and honesty was finally arriving. I don't think I realized what I was doing. I nodded slowly. "Most people don't." She looked directly at me. "For the first time in months, maybe years." "Dad, I treated you like an account." The room fell silent. It was painful to hear. But it was also true, and truth is where healing begins. A few minutes later, she surprised me. She told me things I hadn't known, things she hadn't shared before. The marriage wasn't going well. Not at all. The financial problems were worse than I'd realized. Brandon blamed everyone else for everything. His employer, the economy, his friends, the landlord, me, anyone except himself. The more pressure life applied, the less responsibility he accepted. And eventually Emily started noticing. Really noticing. One night she said they'd argued for nearly 3 hours. Not about money, about accountability. Every solution required somebody else to sacrifice. Never Brandon. Always someone else. That argument changed something inside her. For the first time, she saw the pattern. The same pattern I'd finally recognized in Hawaii. The belief that other people existed to solve his problems. A few weeks later, the situation exploded. I wasn't there, Emily told me afterward. Apparently, Brandon discovered she'd been meeting with me. Talking honestly, reflecting, growing. He didn't like that. Their biggest fight happened that evening. Words were exchanged, harsh words, painful words. And eventually he left. Not permanently, at least not then. But something fundamental broke. Trust, respect, partnership, whatever you want to call it. The marriage never fully recovered. Several days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. I immediately recognized Emily's handwriting. Inside was a letter, 4 pages long. I still have it, folded carefully in my desk drawer. She apologized, not just for the wedding, for years of taking without appreciating, years of assuming, years of forgetting that behind every dollar was a father who'd worked his entire life. One sentence stood out. I must have read it 20 times. It said, "You spent decades making sure I never felt alone, and somehow I made you feel alone anyway." That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Because it was true, and because she finally understood. Not the money, not the wedding, the loneliness. The loneliness older people rarely talk about. The loneliness of watching your purpose slowly disappear. The loneliness of feeling useful only when someone needs something. The loneliness of becoming invisible. I cried after reading that letter, not from sadness, from relief. Because for the first time I felt seen, really seen. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. Life isn't a Hallmark movie. Wounds that take years to create don't disappear in a weekend. But something important happened. The healing started. Not because Emily begged. Not because I surrendered. Because truth finally entered the room. And truth has a remarkable way of setting people free. A few days later she called. "Did you read it?" "Yes." Silence. Then she asked quietly, "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I looked out the window. The evening sun was settling over the neighborhood. Warm, steady, patient, much like love itself. Finally I answered, "I think we're finally starting." Neither of us knew exactly where the road would lead. But for the first time since the wedding, we were walking it together. And sometimes that's enough. A year can change a lot, or almost nothing. It depends on whether people learn from what happened. The year after Emily's wedding was one of the strangest years of my life. Not because of the conflict, not because of the money, because for the first time in decades, I was learning how to live for myself. That sounds selfish when you're young. It sounds necessary when you're 70. I traveled more. Nothing extravagant. A few bus tours. A train trip through the mountains. Weekend outings with my retirement group. I made new friends. People my age who understood things younger folks often don't. The ache in your knees when rain is coming. The silence of an empty house. The strange feeling of looking in the mirror and seeing your father staring back at you. The realization that time has become more valuable than money. I began enjoying mornings again. Coffee on the porch. Baseball on television. Books I never had time to read. For the first time since my wife died, my life wasn't centered around surviving someone else's crisis. And surprisingly, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Meanwhile, Emily was rebuilding her own life. Slowly. Painfully. Honestly, the separation from Brandon became permanent 6 months after our conversation. Neither of us celebrated it. Divorce isn't a victory. It's usually the receipt for a long list of mistakes. Emily moved into a smaller apartment, sold things she didn't need, created a budget, started living within her means. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were real. And real change matters more than dramatic change. One evening, she came over for dinner. Just the two of us. I grilled burgers in the backyard. Simple, ordinary, comfortable. The way family gatherings used to feel. As we sat eating, she smiled and shook her head. "What?" She laughed softly. "I used to think you had life figured out." I nearly choked on my burger. "Me? Yeah." I laughed. "Emily, I've been making it up for 70 years. That made her laugh too. Then she became serious. "I think I understand something now." I waited. "When Mom died, you never let me see how hard things were." That surprised me, because it was true. I had hidden almost everything. The fear, the debt, the exhaustion, the loneliness. Parents do that. We protect our children from storms by standing in front of them. Sometimes for so long that they never realized there was a storm at all. She looked down at her plate. "I thought life was easier than it really is." I nodded. "I know. And because of that, I didn't understand what you gave up." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You understand now." And she did. Not perfectly. Nobody does. But enough. More than enough. The following spring, Emily invited me to a family gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a barbecue at a local park. A handful of relatives. Close friends. People who genuinely cared about one another. When I arrived, I noticed something immediately. A chair sat beside hers at the main picnic table. Reserved. Waiting. She waved me over. "Dad." I walked toward her. Then she smiled. "Your seat's right here." Such a small thing. A chair. Most people wouldn't think twice about it. But older people understand. Respect often appears in small moments. The invitation. The phone call. The remembered birthday. The seat saved at the table. For a second I couldn't speak. Because a year earlier, I hadn't even been invited to her wedding. Now she was saving a place for me. Not because she needed money, not because she wanted help, because she wanted me there. The difference meant everything. Later that afternoon, she stood up to make a short toast. Nothing formal, just a few words. But I'll remember them for the rest of my life. She raised her glass, then looked directly at me. When I was younger, I thought love was something people said. The park became quiet. She continued, "Now I understand love is what people do." I felt my throat tighten. She smiled through tears. My dad spent his whole life showing me love. I just didn't always recognize it. Nobody spoke. Several relatives wiped their eyes, mine included. Then she added, "Thank you for never giving up on me even when I made it hard." I looked away for a moment. Sometimes gratitude is harder to receive than criticism, especially when you've waited years to hear it. The barbecue continued. Kids played nearby. People laughed. The sun slowly drifted lower in the sky. And as I sat there watching my daughter talk with relatives, something became clear. I had spent months thinking this story was about revenge. It wasn't. Not really. The wedding, the missed invitation, the rent money, the arguments, those were only the surface. The real story was about boundaries, about dignity, about understanding that love and obligation are not the same thing. For years, I believed being a good father meant saying yes. Yes to every request. Yes to every sacrifice. Yes to every rescue. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they can appreciate what they've been given. Life taught Emily that lesson. Not me, life. And life is often a far better teacher than anger. Looking back now, I don't hate Brandon. I don't wish him harm. His choices created his future, just as mine created mine. That's how cosmic justice works most of the time. Not with revenge, not with punishment, but with consequences. Quiet, patient, unavoidable. As for Emily and me, our relationship isn't perfect. No relationship is, but it's honest. And after everything we've been through, honesty feels like a miracle. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Never measure your worth by how useful you are to other people. Your value doesn't come from what you provide. It comes from who you are. And if someone only notices you when they need something, the problem isn't your absence. It's their blindness. Today, when I look at my daughter, I don't see the woman who forgot to invite me to her wedding. I see someone who learned, someone who grew, someone who found her way back. And honestly, that's all any parent can hope for. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about the people who quietly sacrifice for you. Maybe it's a parent, a grandparent, a spouse, a friend. If they're still here, tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait until regret becomes your teacher. And if you've ever had to choose between resentment and healing, I'd love to hear your story too. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And remember, the people who love us most are often the ones we should thank while we still can.